Wow, I could work like this without doing anything else. That's not my quote. That's what about half the people say that I work with after doing just this one thing in their studio. And it's not adding more panels. After working with 100 plus studios over the past 8 years, certain patterns show up that you won't find in any textbook or any forum post. And so today I'm sharing the reoccurring lessons that I've learned and that really only become visible once you've treated enough rooms. Hey, what's up? It's Jesko from AcousticSinsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. Now, a lot of the lessons that I'm about to show you actually come down to one thing really, and that is that people get lost in the process of treating their studios. And mainly it's because they focus on the wrong order of things, they prioritize the wrong things, and they make the whole thing way too complicated. And that's exactly why I built Acoustic Treatment Essentials. It starts with finding your listening position, then walks you through building your own bass traps step by step, and then shows you where to place them and why. And that's the same sequence that I teach my consulting students, but it's packaged in a way so you can actually do it on your own. So everything is in there. The construction plans, the placement strategy, and then the advanced module for if you want to take it that extra 20%. So check that out. It's the Acoustic Treatments Essential Bundle. The link is in the description. But with that, let's get to the patterns that I've seen reoccurring time and time again when people treat their studios. And the number one thing that makes the biggest difference isn't actually treatment. It's placing your listening position and speakers. I've talked about this a lot on the channel already, but it's worth repeating. 50% of the people that I work with haven't properly optimized this before we start. But when they go through this strategically and diligently, you end up with an amazing soundstage. The bass tightens up, and really the speakers reveal what they can actually do. And the common reaction is, wow, I can probably work like this without doing anything else. No panels, no absorption, no diffusion, just positioning of the listening position and the speakers. This is the single biggest lever in any home studio, no matter what size or budget. And if you skip it or you do it carelessly, the problem is that you're basically fighting an uphill battle. Instead of working with the natural response of the room, you're working against it for the rest of the process. And usually you cannot recover from poor placement of your listening position and speakers. Now, the second pattern that I see is that people simply get stuck and they really stop before they properly get started. Usually it's analysis paralysis. It's just that the rabbit hole goes so deep and they dive in so deep that they just don't see the bigger picture anymore and they give up because they just don't know what to focus on anymore. And the main thing is usually focusing on measurements, right? Thinking that you need to get data in order to make the required decisions at the beginning of this process. But then what happens is that they find that it's too complicated. They don't understand what it is they're looking at and they don't know what to do with that data. And it just ends up confusing people more than anything else. And so they just give up. And I think the underlying issue here is that there's kind of this sense that you need to delegate the decision making to a swath of data basically from these acoustic measurements instead of trusting your own hearing, which is much easier and which is kind of the second problem, that you don't believe that your hearing is good enough to actually make the required decisions that you need to at the beginning of the treatment process. Maybe it's because measurements are more objective than your hearing, and obviously technically that's true, but when you don't know what to do with that data, when you don't know how to interpret and use that data constructively, what's the point? It doesn't actually lead anywhere. Where people also get stuck is just overcomplicating the entire treatment process, right? There are a lot of small decisions to be made. And if you think from the start that you need to make a real effort to get everything perfect, you might be focusing on details that don't really matter all that much. And things become so complicated that you end up just not finishing, right? So this is, for example, mixing densities in your porous absorbers, or thinking that you absolutely need resonance absorbers, typically membrane traps. And this is obviously a problem when porous absorption at the right quantities and depths basically covers 90% of what you need in terms of treatment. And the fourth thing that I see people get stuck on is just simply obsessing about the wrong things, right? So this is, for example, your door in the corner, which keeps you from placing bass traps there, or a window in the wrong position. And then people end up just thinking about that the entire time instead of actually thinking about all the other things they can do. The key here is to keep things simple. Acoustic treatment is a difficult process and you want to get it done. And so you want to focus on the things that you can do and not the things that you can't do, while keeping things as simple as possible. And that kind of brings me to the next pattern that I'm seeing, and that is that this whole process is a lot more complicated and difficult than people think, right? Just building, well, basically planning, building your treatment and installing it is an intense process that takes a lot of work. And like I said before, a lot of little decisions that you need to make. And so there's a lot of potential there for making mistakes. Yeah. So for example, just cutting wood the wrong way. And then you need to redo things because you didn't measure correctly. You didn't calculate correctly. Yeah. That stuff happens. And so this entire process can be intimidating. It can be intense. It's laborious. And especially if you do it on your own, building, 30 to 40 bass traps is a lot of work. And then installing them, particularly under the ceiling, can be quite intense. Life can get in the way, projects drag out for months potentially. You might even have those packs of insulation material waiting in your garage for you to build the panels, but you never actually get to it because it's just too much of a task. And the way to deal with this is to obviously break things down into steps, to estimate the time that it takes to do this properly, and then to just go through it diligently. And it's just super important to do that correctly in order to get things done. And so it's also at the core of planning the process in the Acoustic Treatment Essentials program. Now, the next pattern that I've seen is that every room can throw you a curveball that you didn't expect, right? So this is just some materials that you haven't seen before, which affect the response of the room in a way that isn't textbook, some measurement data that you haven't seen before. This still happens all the time, even after all the studios that I've helped treat, all the measurements that I've looked at together with my customers. And this is just something you have to kind of deal with. It's something you have to expect and then work around. And oftentimes this means going back to fundamentals, right? Working through things step by step, iterating until you've got it figured out. And this can be really time consuming and confusing, but it does work. But still, oftentimes you end up in a kind of pick your poison situation, right? So you have two options and you simply have to make a decision. You have to understand what your priorities are and then make a decision on what you're willing to compromise on. So, for example, oftentimes it's a question of, do you prioritize sound or do you prioritize ergonomics? Do you prioritize sound or do you prioritize natural light? And so you have several options and none of them are ideal, and you simply have to make a decision. And that's the one that works the best for you in your situation. Oftentimes it's not actually what works best, what is technically best from an acoustics perspective. Other things matter, right? Budget, time, how much effort you want to put into this. A lot of things matter that aren't just, is this the best acoustic response I can get? And so in order to get great results, instead of just average results in your studio, is really about understanding where your priorities are. I found that the people who get the furthest really prioritize sound above almost anything else and are capable and willing to make those hard decisions to, for example, block a window because that's where your absorption needs to go in order to control early reflections. Or they're willing to sacrifice enough space to fully get the low end under control. It's really about commitment, and it's the people who are willing to go the extra mile who also then get the benefits and get the results. So here's what I want you to take away from treating 100 plus studios. First of all, focus on the listening position and the speaker positioning. It is by far the biggest lever. If you don't do this, you're basically fighting an uphill battle. and keep it simple. This rabbit hole will paralyze you if you go too deep. Accept that the building takes time and plan for it. Focus on coverage and depth, not exotic strategies, because the room will throw you curveballs, and the only way to deal with that is to go back to fundamentals and just work through it systematically, step by step. Which means you also have to know your priorities. The best studios come from people who are willing to commit fully to the sound. And of course, if you just need a structured path to guide you through all of this without getting lost in the rabbit hole, you can also check out my free home studio treatment framework, which I'll also link in the description. It's my main 5 steps, very top level, to guide you from beginning to end, to focus on what matters and what doesn't in the right order to take your room from basically empty to fully treated. All right, I hope that gives you some perspective. As always, let's get back to learning to trust our ears and having fun making music in the studio. I'll see you in the next video.